You're listening to Mayor Brown's mini-series, The AI Legislative Update, with Arsen and Howard, where we'll cover all the important U.S. AI legislative updates you'll want to know, at both the state and federal level. We'll cover existing state and federal laws and policies that regulate AI, the new bills being presented to address it, and what's necessary for your business to develop, adapt to, and utilize AI.
Basically, think of this as your quarterly AI review. Welcome to our podcast, and we're delighted to have you with us. Howard, maybe give us a little bit more about your background.
Thanks, Arsen. I've been a partner at Mayor Brown for the past 17 years. I co-lead our public policy, regulatory, and government affairs group. Before I came to Mayor Brown, I was the chief telecom and internet counsel at the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee.
And I'm Arsen Karinyan. I'm a partner here at Mayor Brown's Los Angeles office. I'm in the data privacy and AI group. And I essentially help companies comply with domestic and international data privacy laws, including helping them comply with various ad tech standards and implementing a global comprehensive plan that's harmonized across the board.
Great. So, Arsen, what state laws currently in effect regulate AI?
Well, at the moment, there are a number of state privacy laws that regulate AI. In particular, in Colorado, Virginia, and Connecticut. These are comprehensive data privacy laws that went into effect in 2023. And what they do is essentially they have a standard called automated decision making and profiling, which typically is done through AI tools that make decisions about individuals. And if you do engage in automated decision making and profiling, consumers essentially have the right to opt out and to get essentially a human review of the process. Now, out of all these states from the 2023 laws, Colorado is the furthest along in the process. They've actually not only do they have their statute similar to Virginia and Connecticut, but they've also passed regulations that do a more comprehensive analysis and requirements of usage of automated decision-making tools, including requiring to not only offer that opt-out, but also to conduct a privacy impact assessment with very specific requirements if you're using AI tools in the process. And interestingly enough, they address some of the requirements we see in AI principles, which is transparency and explainability, by requiring you to include some specific language about circumstances where you are using AI, and also how that AI works. So Colorado is definitely the furthest along. However, what also happened in 2023 is we saw a lot more states pass data privacy laws, which included automated decision making and profiling within their scope. Some of these states include Texas, Florida, Montana, Tennessee, Indiana, Oregon, and Delaware. And all of these state privacy laws go into effect from 2024 to 2026. There are also some existing AI laws in other states that deal with sectorial issues. For example, Illinois has an AI Video Interview Act, which requires applicants to be informed and given other rights in connection with using AI to conduct a video interview. And then New York City itself passed the local law 144, which requires conducting a bias audit and giving notices in connection with using AI tools to vet candidates or for promoting employees. And then finally, another noteworthy mention is California actually adopted the White House AI Bill of Rights, where it was more of a declaration that essentially that any future legislation that comes down, the legislator is committed to the principles outlined in the AI Bill of Rights.
And so who do these laws and, in the case of Colorado, regulations apply to? Do they just apply to developers of AI models? Do they apply to deployers as well?
Yeah, well, because these laws or requirements related to automated decision making are developed in the context of data privacy laws, they actually don't specify whether you need to be a developer or a trainer of AI models. Rather, what they do is they apply to controllers of personal data. And so any entity that determines the purposes and means of processing the personal data which would not only capture the developers of the AI tool and also users of AI tools. So both of those would be in scope, along with meeting other criteria to generally be subject to those data privacy laws.
And with Colorado being the kind of most advanced from a regulatory perspective, what do businesses need to do? I mean, can you kind of have different rules for complying with the Colorado regulations, and but those don't apply to your business outside of Colorado, or is Colorado going to drive how your business is going to sort of shape AI across the country?
Well, I think to a certain extent, a lot of these data privacy laws, they do share some common elements. So a lot of companies are obviously they don't just operate in one state. We have a lot of companies are multi-state or multinational. So one of the things that they need to do is essentially harmonize all of these requirements among the state privacy laws and also on a global scale. And so Colorado, I think where it's helpful is it is the furthest along in connection, for example, the for the transparency and explainability related to use of AI. So I think where that's helpful is there is a bit of a gap in how you go about addressing that under other states' privacy laws. And so it's a good guidepost to use, even if you're not subject to Colorado's law, as to what you should say in your privacy notice to be transparent about your use of AI and also your any type of assessments you're doing for privacy or risk assessments related to AI.
And so, we're almost towards the end of the year, so a lot of states have either wrapped up their legislative sessions or about to. What did you see? What were some of the major kind of trends? What were bills that really caught your attention during this past legislative session?
Yeah, well, what was interesting was there were over 190 AI related bills that were introduced in 2023 nationwide. And they were essentially a mixed bag, right? I mean, they involved some AI usage in government. So some bills pertain to it was more declaratory that the government will commit or to resource devoting resources to addressing AI along with passing laws governing AI or certain sectors in the government will deal with AI. And there's also some AI related bills pertaining to healthcare, employment, financing, insurance. And so it was a bit of a mixed bag in that area. I think the one of the noteworthy ones was California's AB 331, which was a sort of a comprehensive legislation regulating AI, and it involves conducting risk assessments before using AI, sort of in line with a lot of the models we see domestically and internationally, which use a risk based approach to AI regulation. However, I think California will still ultimately drive the nation as it did with data privacy laws in connection with AI, because even though Colorado is the furthest along so far, at least in its privacy law and regulating automated decision making, California, under its privacy law, gave authority to the California Privacy Protection Agency to develop regulations governing not only automated decision making, but also artificial intelligence. And so recently, and during the September 8, 2023 board meeting of this agency, they actually released, not officially for public comment, but as part of an agenda item for their meeting notes, very comprehensive, at least drafts related to what they're envisioning with their regulation of AI. And this will entail doing very detailed risk assessments for using AI or training of AI and making using AI for automated decision making, including in housing and insurance and education, criminal justice, healthcare, and also it'll require submitting those risk assessments to the agency with certification from an executive in the company. Now we'll see. It's an evolving process, obviously, and we'll see what the ultimate text is that it gets released for public comment as part of the rulemaking process, where the public can comment on the draft release and ultimately various iterations of the draft get rolled out for further public comment. But it was definitely interesting to see.
What do you see going into next year? What are some of the major trends that you're anticipating on the state legislative front next year.
It's sort of a interesting situation. I was listening to one of the senators from Connecticut speak during the IAPP AI conference. And one of the things he mentioned is at the moment, and maybe this is unique to Connecticut, or it could be the case in other state with the other state legislators, but there is sort of like two groups of camps with the legislators on how to regulate AI, which will drive what we see in 2024. One group is sort of the doomsday crowd, which essentially says that AI is bad, it's going to take over society. We need to essentially stop it or put very restrictive provisions on it. And then there's the other group that tends to think that AI is definitely beneficial, not only for using in government, but also in the private sector. But it just needs some safety brakes to regulate the risks that might be present. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2024. I think, if I had to be Nostradamus and speculate, I think there could be one state down the road that, similar to how California did with its data privacy law, passes a comprehensive AI regulation, which is, I guess, equivalent to the draft EU AI Act, where it covers the type of risk assessments you need to do, the type of mitigation measures you need to implement, some transparency and explainability requirements, and it would ultimately should be or could be industry agnostic, where as long as you're engaged in either training, using, or deploying an AI tool, that this regulation would apply to you. So time will tell. We'll see what happens. But at the minimum, in the absence of a comprehensive federal legislation and a comprehensive state legislation, I think we'll see the existing state privacy laws continue to regulate this area. Great. And Howard, how about yourself? I mean, what are you seeing on the federal front? I know we're seeing a lot of chatter, or at least in last year, we were seeing a lot of chatter about a federal comprehensive privacy law. I know it included some AI-related provisions in there. But what are you seeing so far this year on the federal front?
Well, so far this year, comprehensive privacy legislation has not been reintroduced. But you're right that the legislation that was passed by the House Energy and Commerce Committee last year did have an AI component because it talked about would have put certain requirements in place for algorithmic decision making. This year, while there's a lot of talk about privacy and about the talk about the need to have comprehensive privacy legislation as sort of a foundation before there's AI legislation, there's been a flurry of activity on the AI front. Senate Majority Leader Schumer has led an effort with Senators Heinrich, Young, and Rounds. They've had a number of listening sessions where they brought in AI experts on a number of topics to further educate senators about AI and about the various societal impacts of AI. But concurrent with that effort, there have been a number of other senators that have introduced legislation. And it's really been across the landscape. I mean, AI at its core implicates, as we talked about, privacy, it implicates intellectual property, it implicates the government's use of AI. It implicates a lot of areas, the financial services sector. And so, we've seen elections, we've seen bills introduced that impact AI and will impact AI overall, but coming from a certain sector and coming from certain committees and certain senators with keen interest in these various areas.
And what's interesting with data privacy, and could be the case with AI as well, is that there doesn't seem to be, at least from my perspective, but let me know if I'm wrong, a political divide. I think there's both a need from the consumer side and from the business side for there to be some regulation of data privacy and AI. But are you seeing a polarization along the lines of party affiliation when it comes to AI legislation being proposed?
No, and you're right about data privacy. I will say that the data privacy debate last year really demonstrated the bipartisan interest in comprehensive privacy legislation. And I would say the sort of core of uh, privacy requirements were very bipartisan. Where privacy legislation is broken down are is really in more of the enforcement realm. Whether there should be a private right of action, what agencies should have enforcement authority, and then also whether states should be preempted. Um, in the AI debate, we've seen a lot of bipartisanship. I mean, every really kind of major AI bill that we've seen so far has been bipartisan, and so I think it really demonstrates that, notwithstanding how polarized a lot of issues are in Congress, AI is one where there is a lot of common interest, common concern, and a desire to work together to really get ahead of the technology to the extent policymakers can, in order to make sure that it is used safely.
And we did see the White House, of course, AI Bill of Rights, and then it followed with the executive order earlier this last week, and then the G7 statement about the AI principles. When we're looking at the guidance that's coming out of the White House, do you think it's going to have an influential impact on the type of legislation that may ultimately get passed on a federal level?
Well, one example is we already did right after the White House released the executive order. The chair of the Senate Intel Committee, Senator Warner, along with Senator Moran, introduced a bill to basically take the elements of the executive order that have to do with the government's use of AI and impose that statutorily, and basically require federal government agencies to utilize NIST risk management framework to govern the use of AI in the respective agencies. So I think you're already seeing it. I think in terms of the Bill of Rights, I mean, I think you're seeing that impact the debate about bias as well. So I do think the White House has played a real leadership role. I think documents that came out of the Hiroshima process, the statements coming out of the UK Safety Summit. I mean, those are all definitely impacting the debate because, I mean, at its core, and again, whether it's dealing with one of the kind of foundational elements like privacy or cybersecurity, or one of the kind of the outputs of AI in terms of how it impacts things like elections, how it impacts intellectual property. You're seeing risk assessments, you're seeing safety protocols. I mean, you're seeing really a desire to have sort of core and common elements so that AI models are developed safely, kept secure, and used responsibly.
And I guess one last question is, are a lot of these federal laws sector specific that we're seeing, or the legislation, I should say, or are we seeing some more proposals to have a comprehensive AI legislation that covers all potential sectors? So we don't have essentially what we had with the privacy laws on a federal level, where there was laws that regulate financial institutions, some that regulate healthcare providers, some that provide online services to children, for example.
I would say that they're what we've seen so far, they're not sector specific. However, some of these bills are more specific with respect to the areas that they cover. For example, Senators Coons, Blackburn, Klobuchar, and Tillis announced a bill to protect voice and likeness of performers and artists from AI generated replicas. Senator Klobuchar is leading a bill to deal with the use of AI in elections and campaigns, and to make sure you don't have sort of deep fakes being used to confuse voters about what a candidate is saying or not. Senator Thune and Klobuchar have a bill to deal with how do you get machine learning and AI models available to smaller entities. I mean, as we've seen so far, the machine learning necessary to produce a large language model is very, very sort of financially intensive in
Right.
terms of what it takes to develop a model like that, and utilize the sort of cloud storage to have a model like that. And so we've seen an attempt to have all sort of small entities have access to large language models. So that's, I mean, so really, so yeah, we have not seen, to your point, specific AI rules for the healthcare industry
Right.
and a different set for the financial industry. We're seeing them across the board.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of that is, at least what I've seen on a federal level, and I suppose it could be the same on the state level, is for sector specific issues. We might see some guidance come out. We've already seen some, for example, from the various departments, whether it's the departments that regulate copyright and trademark, issuing guidance regarding IP, and then the Department of Justice, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So it looks like there is at least some appetite for using existing regulatory powers to also regulate AI under based on some joint letters that were published recently.
Yeah, and also based on the executive order. Absolutely. And especially when it comes to critical infrastructure entities, there's a desire to see DHS lead, but for critical infrastructure entities, different sectors have different sector agencies responsible for kind of coordinating their cybersecurity and risk. And so, for those, while again, DHS will largely kind of lord over the process, we're going to see the critical infrastructure entities, really kind of answering to their respective agencies.
And Howard, as we wrap this up, is 2024 going to finally be the year that we have a federal privacy law and regulation on AI?
I hope that it is. I've worked on comprehensive privacy legislation for a long time, and it's been heartening to see the narrowing of differences on a comprehensive law. I think when you look at the guts of bills in terms of what the kind of notice process to consumers should be, what permissible uses of data should be, what types of data practices should be prohibited or subject to sort of heightened consumer notice and choice. I mean, I think the differences have really narrowed, and I hope 2024 is the year for privacy legislation. I also think what's interesting is there's an even greater impetus from a lot of members of Congress to get privacy done because they view privacy as such a foundational element to do AI, and there's such an interest in AI. And the reason privacy is so important to AI is because the collection of data to train large language models is so important that making sure you have the right requirements in place that govern the collection and use of especially personally identifiable information is such a core part of making sure that you're going to get AI right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that's the case because we currently deal with data breach laws on the 50 state level, and soon we're seeing that a trickle down effect with respect to comprehensive data privacy and now AI. So, having some federal comprehensive laws that preempt state laws would certainly be welcome relief. But stay tuned, everyone. We'll see what happens during our next podcast in 2024. We'll continue to monitor some of the trends we're seeing with bills and legislation, and never a dull moment when it comes to privacy and AI. And things change on a weekly and sometimes even on a daily basis. So stay tuned and stay up to date.
And thanks for joining us.